Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Monday Night Football between the Packers and the Saints. Gonna break down what to expect for tonight's matchup. But first off, a look at the Draftkings DFS side and what I'm doing out there in my GPP lineups. Go through some strategy, some correlation, go through an injury report, the chalk, all that sort of fun stuff. And then afterwards, look through the prop side of things and my Underdog and Prize Picks exposure. They've already gone to myself. You might want to consider adding to a few slips of your own. So a lot to go through. It's not waste any time at all. Let's start off with first off, a look at the GPP side. Tonight's slate is really going to come down to your read on what you expect to happen. There's one real chalky script where you have the 2 touchdown favorites over there with the Packers, but a Saints team that clearly has not given up on their coach quite yet. So I would say that before you go out there, you start clicking names, figuring out what contests that you want to enter, you need to figure out whether you agree with this chalk tonight. That, of course, going to be that Green Bay side of things, as they are that 2 touchdown favorite. And what you're getting out there with those favorites is sometimes double, sometimes even 3 times the ownership out there on those players. That's telling us that you're going to see a lot of 4-2 Packers lineups, potentially even a lot more of those 5-1s, which are usually pretty rare lineup constructions that people are going to be getting to for tonight. So the reason I say you need to figure out whether you agree with that or not beforehand is if you do, you need to be avoiding those large field GPPs. If you want to win against 50 to 100,000 other entries, it's usually not a good idea, or plus EV, to go out there and play that chalky game script. So beforehand, right, try and go out there and decide how you want to play for tonight. And if you want to be a little bit chalkier, take that exposure that you might have gone out there and 150 maxed out there in the big $25, and maybe look to some smaller single entries where it's the $100, $200 single entries. Enter a bunch of those kind of contests where you don't have to worry about duplicating that leverage nearly as much as what you would out there in a 50 to 100,000 entry contest. So that would be my sort of advice out there for this kind of slate. But on the flip side, if you look at this slate, you say the Saints don't think they're going to give up. If you go, oh, the Saints might even go out there and win this sort of game, then maybe the large field GPPs would be perfect for your sort of exposure. Reason for that, of course, is if you're playing with anything that's Saints heavy, maybe even a 3-3 lineup out there for tonight, it's going to be a little bit lower owned than what you're used to seeing. And that's why in large field GPPs, where you got to beat all of those other people, it might not be a bad idea to go out there and play in that sort of contest. So beforehand, I think you should be making that sort of decision. Personally, I side towards the chalkier side of things. I think that the Packers are that deserving 2 touchdown favorite. But if you disagree, if you see any sort of hole in that kind of argument, then please, I think the large field GPPs would be a good spot for you guys to play. But now let's go player by player. I guess worth noting from the injury side, that the one real piece of injury, quote unquote, news that we're waiting on would be out there with MVS, who is currently questionable out there for tonight. So want to monitor his status, make sure he's actually playing before you go out there and use him in lineups. But a lot of the main, quote unquote, news that we were waiting on happened well before lock. That would be Kamara, who was ruled out, Chris Olave, who's not going to be playing, and then Spencer Rattler, who will be quarterback over there for the Saints as well. So a lot of that news, a lot of the more important pieces we know about ahead of time. The one guy that you're going to want to monitor, though, would be an MVS. But now let's go player by player, give you guys an idea of how I'm attacking this slate. And up top with the Josh Jacobs, he's going to be one of my higher exposed plays. Unfortunately, though, he is going to be nearly 85% combined ownership there between flex and captain. So extremely popular, extremely expensive at $11,600. But with the 2 touchdown spread, you'd expect them to be running the ball quite a bit. And the matchup against the Saints team isn't nearly as tough as what it historically would have been. They are, the last 4 or 5 years, one of the best defenses that we've had in the NFL. Not so much this year because of the time of possession issues. It's not really their fault on defense that they're going out there and getting scored on. It's more so that their offense can't keep the ball long enough to post numbers out there on that side. So Josh Jacobs, he benefits from all of that. And Spencer Rattler, a quarterback, a little bit less efficient at that position, is only going to make him a better play for this evening. Speaking of solid plays, we've got Jordan Love here at $10,600, a little bit more expensive than we probably want, but given that they're expected to control the time of possession, they're massive favorites out there for tonight. It's not the best matchup on paper, it's not the highest total either, but you can see a lot of people playing Jordan Love lineups. And unfortunately, because I do think the Packers are the deserving favorites, that probably means I'm going to be playing quite a bit of Jordan Love myself. So I don't really have that much to say about these top two. If you're playing the chalky side of things, you're going to have quite a bit of a Jacobs and a Love. There's just no leverage, no real value to be had with either one. So even if you end up getting one of these two players right, you're not going to be getting any leverage towards the rest of the field. So that's why I don't think we need to spend too much time there. More of an interesting player, somebody I think that could win or actually lose you the GPP tonight, would be a Kendre Miller over here for the Saints. So he's $9,400. He's priced up with the anticipation of Alvin Kamara being rolled out, and he's about 35% owned. So he's not being completely overlooked there at $9,400, but he is the kind of player, he is at that kind of ownership level where if you went with 50 to 70% out there in lineups, you're getting legit leverage compared to the rest of the field. So I think he's a little bit script dependent. I'd rather have this be a competitive game for the Saints to go out there and use Miller as much as we'd like them to, because if they're playing from way behind, 2-3 touchdowns from behind, like the game script would indicate, that's not the best out there for a running back's usage. But he does catch a few balls out of the backfield. We've seen that the last few weeks, so it's not like he's completely dead if they're playing from behind. It's just that I think in large field GPPs, if you were going to play in those sort of contests, try and get a little bit different to the field, that Kendre Miller would be a really good way to do so. Jaden Reed is also not all that popular. They're at about 34% combined ownership, but not the best play at just 1.3x points per dollar value, but at only 34% projected ownership is a decent play because of his big play upside. It's worth noting that he's a little bit inconsistent. He's shown that here in 2024, but he's also had a few 20 to 30 point games this year, which is kind of what you're hoping for at $9,000. Spencer Rattler at $8,600, I think it's a fair price tag for the kind of production that'll bring, and as sizable underdogs, they could be forced to pass a little bit more, which would only be helpful out there for his usage rates. So kind of like a Kendre Miller, where I'm hoping that it stays more competitive to go out there and play him. Rattler, I'm not as worried about, because if they're playing from way behind, that would actually only be helpful out there for Rattler, and if it stays close, that's not necessarily a bad thing for him either. So, I'm going to play guys like Miller even when playing from behind, and same thing with Rattler, right? Even in those 3-3 game scripts, he could be played there as well. So it's not like it's a death sentence if you're not getting the perfect game script. It's just that in those specific scenarios where they would see benefit, for example, if it's a close game, I'm playing more Kendre Miller, and if they're playing from way behind, I kind of like Spencer Rattler as a buyback a little bit more. They've got guys like Dobbs, Watson here. Worth noting that Watson is a little bit higher owned at the captain position than what I was hoping for. A lot of that because of his big play upside, and as the 2 touchdown favorites, you'd expect them to get a little bit more attention at captain too. So I think I understand why he's a little bit more popular at that spot. Does have a higher ceiling than players like a Romeo Dobbs, but when you're looking at the median projection, there's not much of a difference between these two players. So at the flex position, I think I prefer Romeo Dobbs over Christian Watson, more of a PPR wide receiver, which is kind of what we're looking for in these lower total games. Whereas a Christian Watson, though he is a little bit higher owned out there at the captain spot, I like him a lot more at that position. So the way I'm looking at this, I'm going to try and leverage Dobbs out there at the flex position, and then maybe try and take 15 to 20% Watson at captain to try and get over the field there. If MVS ends up playing, he's a downfield threat. He's a big play threat every time he's on the field. I would really like him as a buyback over there from the Saints side of things. The Packers defense, if you're looking for a correlated 4-2 or a 5-1 Packers build, he'd be a really good option to go out there and correlate with Josh Jacobs. A Tucker Kraft is a really cheap tight end in this mid-tier range. I would say that he should probably be like $6,400 to $7,000. So I love him there at $5,800. These kickers, I'm not really looking at groupie all that much, but McManus there on the favorites. I don't think you can go wrong with the kicker projecting for nearly 9 fantasy points. Jawan Johnson there at $7,600, kind of like what you had there with the buybacks on the Saints. I really like guys like Jawan Johnson. And MVS is more of that high ceiling player, the kind of guy that could get us to 15 to 20 fantasy points. In a cash single entry lineup, I want to do my spend ups more so on the Packers side of things. Like I'd rather have a Christian Watson than trying to go to somebody like an MVS, for example, deal. But with my lower tier players, if I'm going to go to that buyback, you need at least one in every lineup, if not two. Over there on the single entry side, a Juwan Johnson would be a really good option for that. Main reason being is that he's more of a PPR sort of wide receiver, and if I'm playing that chalkier game script, assuming that the Saints maybe don't have their best day on the offensive side, you want PPR guys from that team. You don't really want guys that are deep play threats or that have to go out there and give you a bunch of yardage to go out there and get to the optimal. You more so want like a Juwan Johnson who could go like 4 catches for 50 yards and maybe be the buyback that you have to have that way. Moving on to this 4K and below range, this is what I would classify as the value tier for the rest of this player pool. There's not a lot of guys that you'll love, and I guess I'll point out the few that I will be getting to in my single entries. A Kevin Austin Jr. over there for the Saints, you could get to him for a little bit of buyback wide receiver exposure. A Foster Moreau, he is the backup tight end over there for the Saints, does play a solid 40% of the snaps though, so I would, if you can afford it, prefer to get up to somebody like Johnson, especially because he's only $1,400 more than Moreau, but you are getting slightly lower ownership over there on Moreau, and maybe you can't afford that $1,400 difference. I don't think he's the worst play that you could get to towards the bottom. I think you're going to see a lot more Emmanuel Wilson tonight, especially if it is a big lead out there for the Packers. Potentially a Chris Brooks as well. He's their more receiving running back over there for the Packers side of things. These two, you're probably playing in like 5-1 lineups. Like even in 4-2s, it's going to have to be a blowout before these guys are really seeing the field. So unless you're going with a full onslaught, I'm probably not getting to these backup running backs. Dante Pettis out there for the Saints, he could be a viable wide receiver that you're using as a buyback. He's more of that downfield threat, so in my single entries, I think I'd rather even have a Moreau than a Dante Pettis, just because Moreau's a little bit of a safer play with his snap share. But Dante Pettis does have a deep play threat. You know, he's somebody that could conceivably score us a 40, 50-yard touchdown, which makes him viable out there in the large field GPP. So we could look to him. Cedric Wilson, he doesn't get used all that much for the Saints, but with all the guys that they have hurt, might have to play a little bit more. And that's probably where I cut it off. These like pure punts at running back and tight end at the bottom, I'm probably not looking at in lineups. It's more so guys like a Pettis, potentially one of these running backs for the Packers. That would be a low percentage outcome, but the guys that I'm really counting on would be these Johnsons, the Austins down here, the guys that we know are going to play snaps in that PPR, you know, give us that production from the PPR side. Maybe a Dontavian Wicks if you're looking for a cheaper wide receiver over there in Green Bay. Not so much these unheard of commodities that we have here towards the bottom. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got a correlated 2-leg slip that you might want to consider adding for yourself. So it's over here on the underdog side, which by the way has a little bit better correlation rules than what you have over there in Prize Picks. A lot of the same combinations that would pay 2.5, sometimes 2.75x over there on Prize Picks, we can get for a full 3x over here in Underdog. And this combination is a perfect example of that. So the first prop I'm going to take is this over on Josh Jacobs rushing yards, which is at 91.5 on a lot of the major books. So 2-yard discrepancy, not the biggest piece of value, obviously, with just the 2-yard difference, but has a soft matchup against that Saints defense, and they are, of course, the 2-touchdown favorites, which should lead to extra usage over there for their running backs. And as long as this isn't a complete blowout, I'm talking like 3 touchdowns at halftime, I see him getting the kind of usage that he needs in that second half to go over this sort of number. So the matchup against the Saints, by the way, they allow over 100 rushing yards per game to running backs. That is going to be a huge positive out there for Jacobs. That, along with the game script, which should be very favorable out there for the Packers tonight, is why I take an over on the running back position. And then on the other side of things, we've got this under on Kendre Miller, which would be correlated if, of course, the Packers are playing from way ahead. When playing from ahead, teams tend to run the ball a lot more, but when playing from behind, it tends to be the exact opposite. You have to pass the ball to try and conserve time, and of course, to try and score more quickly to bridge that gap. Kendre Miller would be somebody that would see a little bit of a detriment if he were to be in that sort of situation, as of course he's that running back and would like to get some of that traditional running back usage. So at the 10.75 point number, he's somebody that I'd be looking for an under, especially on a half PPR site like we have here on Underdog, where you're not getting a full point every time he gets a catch out of the backfield. While in a losing game script, right, he's going to see less usage on the ground, he would see more usage out of the backfield as a passer, which is why I'd rather take this under over here on Underdog, as in that losing game script, you know, he's not going to get get us like 6-7 catches and get over this number that sort of way. So I just feel like it's a little bit safer to take these unders over here in Underdog, especially on a potential receiving back like we have here with Kendry Miller. And personally, in my projections, I've got him for just under a 9 fantasy point projection here on a half PPR site like we have here in Underdog, which is solid value compared to this 10.75 mark. So a little bit of value on the top, a little bit of value here in the bottom compared to my projections, but more importantly, you're getting the full 3x payout, which is huge on a correlated slip like this, and you're getting a lot of tie together, right? If we get that same kind of game script that we're hoping for, that's going to boost the hit rate of prop number 1, and it's going to boost the hit rate of prop number 2, which is huge if you've been playing props for a long time, regardless of sport. You guys know I do a lot of golf props as well. Correlation, massive for golf props, and of course, massive over here on the football side too. That is all I've got out there for the Monday Night Football preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me. Also, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. And also comment down below who you've got as the top scorer for tonight's slate for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. If you give me that top score and their fantasy score within 2 DraftKings points, you will win a free month access to that Patreon, which of course is where I'm posting all those projections that you see throughout my content. That includes the DFS sheet with all my player pool notes and script notes over there for the Showdown side, and over on the prop side of things, we've also got all the prize picks and underdog prop slips posted over there as well. So for a free chance to earn that, go ahead, give me your top score down below and their score for tonight, and best of luck with all of your exposure, whether it's over there with the giveaway or in GPPs. Hopefully we can take something down there on DraftKings, and then of course on the prop side of things, maybe we go out there and cash our prop slip as well.